Please welcome Hearst Magazine's Michael Clinton and the editors of 4 of the most iconic and long-standing magazine brands.
Come on over, down to the corner, my sisters and my brothers of every different color, don't you feel that sunshine? Telling you to hold tight, things will be all
panel. Good morning. We're not going to do any introductions because there are our esteemed panel, and you can do a search if you'd like to learn more about their amazing backgrounds and experience. We are going to just jump right in, and we're going to make this interactive. I'm going to be interrupting. They're going to be interrupting each other. We want you to raise your hand if you have a question. We're going to sort of shake it up a little bit. So if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, challenges, just let us know, right? So 100 years plus. You know, as Katrina said, the nation has been around from the telegraph to Twitter and every other media revolution in between. So how do brands survive and thrive and expand? But I think my opening question would be, I mean, should we even care about 100 years? Because, you know, it's just a number, you know, as we would say. And so talk a little bit about why we should care, the consumer should care. Talk about 1 or 2 of the great highlights of your year in 2018 that kept you dynamic and nimble and vibrant. And, you know, 100 is the new 60, in case you hadn't heard. So I'm going to start with Susan at the end. Susan, National Geographic.
Well, thanks. First, thank you, Martha Stewart, for that shout out. I was so excited to hear that backstage. But I think we've got a great opportunity at National Geographic to take this iconic brand, everybody knows about National Geographic, but go from the reverence of the brand to the relevance of the brand. And we're so lucky that the things that we've been covering for 131 years are things that people really care about now. We cover the environment, we cover the natural world, we cover science and innovation, we cover the human journey, but we're doing that in really modern ways and on modern platforms. And so to me, that is what I like to do.
Talk about, you did a very a fantastic package on race.
We did.
That is very obviously always topical.
Well,
but
we did a package on race because the racial conversation in the United States has become so ugly, really, and so pointed, and we thought it was worth stepping back and looking at, you know, race. But one of the things we had to do that credibly, I thought, was acknowledge our own very complicated past with race. And so I wrote to our readers and talked about how when it came to people of color in National Geographic, we all but ignored them up through the civil rights movement. And when it came to people in other cultures, non-Western cultures, we tended to exoticize people. And it was a very important admission, I think, for us to make and to just own that history. So you talk about, does 100 years matter? Well, in a case like that, I think 100 years really does matter. Yeah. But then you can tell people what you're doing now to change that story.
Perspective. That's great. Katrina, how about the Nation? Tell us a little bit about.
So the Nation, founded in 1865, immediately after the end of the Civil War, by abolitionists committed to ending slavery. And moving fast forward into the 60s, Martin Luther King Jr. was our civil rights correspondent for 6 years. And today, an extraordinary man, Reverend William Barber Jr., is our civil rights correspondent. But I think what's important, one of the things I find important, Michael, in building on what Susan said, going from reverence to relevance, we are at a time when media, the press, is under attack, not just politically, enemies of the people, but financially. And I think to show the ability to survive in a fast-shifting media landscape and to be trusted, we have, you know, thousands of people who trust our, quote, brand, who understand what the Nation stands for. It's not just clickbaits. With all, you know, due respect, we have a great website, social media, but it's a journalism that counters misinformation, bigotry, injustice with fearless, principled journalism grounded in our principles of many years. So I think that matters. What also matters to me is the largest demographic on our website, 24 to 35-year-olds, who value our coverage of the issues of our time, the movements. And we've done a lot on racial justice, but I'm very proud of our coverage of coming off the Women's March immediately after the inauguration of 2016, and how it got electoralized, and our coverage of the women who've gone into politics. We see in 2018 the results.
Would that have been your best read content this past year?
Our best read content is certainly, we've chronicled political, cultural life for 153 years, but it's certainly the electoral energy of insurgent forces allied with ideas which the nation has championed for decades, once considered heretical, now very much part of the debate, whether it's Medicare for all or free higher ed or a global Green New Deal. So we feel we've contributed to the debate. We've become even more relevant in these times, and it's a question now of how we move forward to capture the energy.
That's great. Jane, let's jump to you because Good Housekeeping is how old?
Okay, so 130, under 135.
Okay.
How's that?
Young.
I mean, I think for Good Housekeeping, always the biggest part of our story is the Institute and the trust that's been built up. I think the 100 years is relevant because of the fact that consumer advocacy, I think we were probably some of the first at the table. So we predate the FDA. The Good Housekeeping Institute was very involved in supporting and promoting the formation of that and many of the regulations around safety, health and safety in terms of products. I think now what we're seeing is that while technology has taken us to a place where more and more products have that built into them, in terms of how products are presenting themselves and being reviewed, there is, I think there's a lot of question around what really works, what really is safe, and that continues to be sort of our stock
and
in
best
trade.
content for you in 2018 was what? What was the high points in terms of what your readers really responded to?
Well, I think wellness is a big part of the conversation, and now wellness is in this consumer space in a different way than it was in the past. So now there are more and more products and services which you can pay for that are supposed to make you healthier. Do they make you healthier, et cetera? So we've launched the GH Wellness Lab this year, really to focus on that. Again, health has always been core to the brand, but now it becomes more important.
Perfect. Joe, how about you?
Well, Popular Science is 147 years old this year, but we don't look a day over 40. I actually think when we talk about being 100 years old, what we're really talking about is being transgenerational, a publication that's there when your readers start reading. And when you think about what that means now, Refinery 29 is 13 years old, Gizmodo is 15 years old, what else is there? Epicurious is 24 years old. So these are all publications that kind of fall within that same bucket for me.
But basically you're saying come see me when you're 100, right?
I'm saying that if you're a
In terms of longevity.
25-year-old, if you're a 25-year-old reader, which is or that 25-year-old kind of archetypal ad buyer that our ad sales teams talk about a lot, transgenerational publications include our publications, but they also include Refinery 29. And they have authority as much as Popular Science does. Now, Popular Science's authority is useful for me as somebody who's trying to keep this thing going in another way, which is for staffing. Obviously we trumpet our authority and we build upon our authority, but you can't be in this room with all of you here and not talk about the fact this is a really dangerous time to be in media, both because you're being attacked from all fronts, because your utility is being questioned and your value is being questioned, and also because your job is being threatened in a lot of ways, because we are working on trying to figure out how large our industry should actually be, and people's staffs are getting cut in brutal and public ways. When I'm trying to hire, and I'm hiring right now, long form editor, DIY editor, and 2 art directors. If you know anybody, please send them to popsci.com/jobs.
There we
but
go.
as I'm hiring right now, one of the first questions that candidates ask me is, are you stable? Am I going to take this job and then not have a job if I pass up this opportunity? And we are.
Right. There we go. Susan, jump in.
I don't know. I feel so much more positive than that sounded anyway, because I feel like we've got an opportunity now to tell these amazing stories across platforms, to reach the 100 million people that we're going to reach on Instagram in about 2 weeks from now, or to put out those stories, in every kind of immersive way to really take people to the places that before they could just read about. I mean, we've always taken people there with pictures. Now we do that still, but we have so many more ways to reach the next generation of readers and users of our content. I think it's incredibly
I
exciting.
think one of the things we heard from Katrina is that the internship program, I'd love you to talk about it. This gets back to talent and young people coming into our business, or seasoned people who want to continue on. You have about 350 people who apply for 6 slots. Is that
12
right?
slots. 12 slots. There are 2
Twice
terms a year. Program marked its 40th anniversary this year. At one point, 2 members of the alum of the Nation internship were Bill Clegg, head of the Liberal Party in the UK, and Ed Miliband, the head of the Labour Party. Somehow we were But more seriously, the internship, for most of the interns who come, it's journalism school. It is one of the best structured, most rigorous introductions to what is so critical at this moment of misinformation, disinformation, building a core of trustworthy, research-driven fact checkers who do write for us, and they're a great cohort. David Korn, for example, was an alum. Neil Barsky, who founded the Marshall Project, was an alum. At one point, the 3 editors of progressive publications in Washington were all Nation alums. So we value this program. We also have student journalism conferences, investing in the next generation of journalists. We run an annual conference each year in New York with 100 journalists. We bring them to New York, and we go to campuses and we meet with journalists. So I understand what you're saying about the concern about jobs, but I still think there's an extraordinary interest in journalism that will find its way. And if I could just pick up something we were talking about in the quote green room, how National Geographic has been a guide to wonder over the years. I want to make the nation, and we had 4 women who are, one was a mayor, one was superintendent, one was a county commissioner in Athens, Georgia. They came into our office last Thursday, and they spoke of joy, the joy of being part of politics.
Here we go.
Which is
That's
hard
an
to
interesting
believe,
comment, right,
hard to
these
believe
days.
in these times,
Yeah.
but we are starting a podcast which is going to reflect the insurgent joy of a lot of these
Fantastic.
people.
I'm going to get to that. Jane, let's shift off of talent and talk about, how we would say that if you go back 10 plus years, all of these brands basically lived on one platform, print platform, right? So let's talk about across the panel how you've blown out your DNA, where you're living, how it's succeeding, what are the pros and the cons, what are the raw truths versus the successes, and
Well,
vice
I mean,
versa.
I guess I was thinking in the sort of the most recent part of the conversation about audience specifically. So with National Geographic coming on to 100 million in one social media platform, that's pretty incredible. For Good Housekeeping, our print audience is as strong as it's ever been, and now our digital platform is delivering exactly the same number of people. So here we are as a brand with the largest engaged audience that we've probably ever had, and yet we're still facing issues. But it's an interesting place to be, thinking about how audience engagement continues to be, I think, for the people sitting up here, our primary focus. And then at the same time, we're involved in a business where we have to try to help convert that into strength.
So I think you're talking about, like, from an advertiser standpoint, just let's pick that as one example. So, you've got robust print, robust digital, robust social, great engagement, but yet it's not recognized, it's not acknowledged, it is,
I think, revenue is the stressor. I think that's the whole piece of it, right? So all of us are in that world, and at the same time, we have audiences who are saying, we want more. We want more from print.
Susan,
we
talk
want more
about
from,
that. Talk about the audience growth.
Well, yeah, I don't think there's any shortage of audience that wants to read deep, rich, fact-based, science-based content. I don't think that's the problem at all. I think we can get those eyeballs. It's how do you monetize those eyeballs on your non-print platforms. I mean, we're lucky enough that we've also got a television channel that obviously brings in a lot of revenue. We've got a trips business, we've got licensing, we have all of these different kinds of businesses that all help support each other. But we're seeing a lot, enormous like hockey stick of growth in revenue on those digital platforms, but it still is not as profitable as it ultimately will need to be.
Joe, just talk about that for a minute. Talk about the audience growth of Pop Science before we get into, if you will, brand extensions, just core content-centric platforms.
Sure. Popsci.com, which is our sort of largest direct measurable platform, has more than doubled in the past 2 years. And so we're really having a lot of good fortune from the goodwill of our readers. It's really nice to see. Obviously, digital means more than just the web, and we've had a lot of success with our Instagram, although not 100 million, and that should be celebrated. I don't know, can we clap for that?
Yeah.
Because that's amazing.
I hope in 2 weeks or so when we cross that mark, we're about to get there, that you will notice a celebration.
Good, we will, and we're right behind you. We'll be there any minute on our Instagram platform, which is also growing just as fast, I promise. But the whole name of the game right now is your readers are everywhere. Being a journalist right now, you have more access to more tools and you've seen more change than somebody who was a journalist 50 years ago had seen in their entire career.
Right.
It's the most exciting time to be working in our field because every day something new that you can reach someone with is popping up. And our job is to be where our readers are. Some of our readers only want to experience popular science on Twitter, and so PopSci is there with content that can be experienced exclusively on Twitter. Some of our readers only want to experience popular science on Instagram, and taking a lot of inspiration from National Geographic, credit where credit is due, we provide an experience that can exist just on Instagram. And if you want to know more, you can always go to popsci.com. But right now, I think there used to be, or not, I don't think I was part of it, I know there used to be this desire to drive everybody to your website, or when they're on your website, drive those people to become subscribers to your magazine. That's not the case anymore, because we don't know, with the exception of our Circ files, which I think everybody here knows is a pretty stable and predictable source of revenue for right now. We obviously can't take it for granted, but it's working. But when it comes to the digital platforms, we don't know how the rules are going to change tomorrow.
Right.
And so we have to be diversifying our ability to attract readers across all the digital
So let's take that another step and talk about, as editors, how you, Jan, I'll go to you first, how you work with the data that you are getting out of the digital sources primarily, because there is a lot, it's data rich. And what do you do with that? I mean, how are you using it? How are you turning it into content? How are you developing more robust relationships? Talk about the data story.
Well, I mean, I would say daily we are looking at how the content that we've been serving up is performing, and our editors on the sites are constantly looking at sort of the demands, not just from our core audience, but in general. So the content is actually being created as this data is coming back to us.
Talk about the This Is Us experience, because this is a live example of how we've used data.
Okay.
She's Canadian, so we pronounce it a little differently.
So basically, what we have learned about our audience in the digital space is that they're ravenous for information and communication around shows like This Is Us. This is one of the ones that's been identified. So when the show airs, we have massive activity, and if we put up one piece of content, everyone's like gobbling it up. So we've sort of taken that to create, well, actually it's really exciting. For the finale, we are going to the night before the finale, we are working with the This Is Us team, and there's going to be a bit of a reveal on gethousekeeping.com, but we have Susan Kalechi on our cover for the March issue, and so we've sort of created content that sort of bridges all of our platforms in terms of that and in terms of being responsive in that space.
So this is really a new discipline, if you will, that editors have. Susan, how about you and your team in terms of using the data that's out there for?
We use data every day to inform our decision making, but I think you've got to use it in a smart way, right? You've also got to be a good journalist and a good editor, and you just can't be completely reactive 100% of the time. I mean, I will tell you, our most read story last year, our biggest Instagram story, our biggest video on YouTube, our single best thing was about a young woman who had a face transplant. And we embedded with this family at the Cleveland Clinic where she had this transplant for 3 years, and it was an incredible story about science and medicine. But what it really was, and what I think really drove that audience engagement, was that it was an incredibly inspiring story about somebody's journey.
Right.
And this was such a brave young woman, and her family was so amazing. I think people really celebrate and want that rich content. And
Would you have predicted that?
I knew. Story? Well, look, I mean, the whole point of being an editor is that you know a good story when one hits you in the butt, right? So yes, I knew it was a great story from the very second that somebody said, we're having this face transplant happening at Cleveland Clinic. Do you think you might be interested in, documenting this? I'm like, yes. But I wouldn't have predicted it would be our biggest piece of content. Right. I am actually surprised by that, because usually our biggest content involves stories about animals, whether it's species preservation or animals,
And you gave a stat backstage about not only was it your best story, but the ranking on what was the ranking on it?
Chartbeat.
Chartbeat.
It was the 41st most engaged story in the world last year out of 60 million stories that they measured. And usually you don't go around and going, yay, we're number 41. But if your playing field is 60 million, and it was the most engaged, health and science story last year as well.
That's
so I
engagement.
just thought, wow, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
it's engagement.
I
How
was
about
surprised.
data for you, Joe? How are you using data to form your content? And we'll go to Katrina next on that.
Well, it's like Susan says, you have to use data every day to make sure you're not flying blind. But it doesn't go down to the sort of percentile decision-making area. Like, we work in buckets of 10%. We can pretty much predict that a story that comes from a predictable tag or a predictable subject matter that performs a certain way over a certain amount of time is going to hit a certain 10% bracket. Like, we can tell it's going to be in the top 10%, and so we need to really put some resources towards that. And we can tell something's going to be in the bottom 10%, but we know that it's like a worthwhile story and have to keep hitting that. For us, data is not so much of a taskmaster as it is kind of an advisor. But it is in every single meeting, in every decision where we have to make about content strategy.
Data as advisor. You too, Katrina?
I would say as advisor, very carefully as advisor, because even while our data analysis and our social media, our website growth has been exponential in the last few years, we work on headlines, we look at SEOs, we're doing all of that. We're also concerned about something that hasn't been mentioned, which is what the impact of Facebook and Google is on our metrics on the web and social media. We'd like to monetize more effectively, but I think we're all having trouble with that. But the audience engagement, I mean, I'm the First Nation editor, second woman editor of The Nation, but I'm first to have hired a sports correspondent, Dave Zirin. And for example, his interview with Coach Popovich about Trump just was off the charts. Our coverage of, we call her AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like Nation clickbait.
Right.
So we have, and then coverage of protest at Standing Rock, coverage of the media. So we have unusual stories that transcend traditional data. And I think, that's part of why we're in the
That's
business.
the magic, right? That's the
I
magic.
was going to say, actually, just to jump in, that, and Susan, you brought it up first, but storytelling wins.
Yes.
Like, it's obviously it's not everything in every place, but data's harder. Like, it's hard to get data around that, but it wins. And
Yeah.
when we've looked at our audiences at different life stages, which is something we've had a bit of conversation about, a really great story, if someone's 23 or someone's 53, we're going to get best engagement there. And it doesn't matter the platform
Right.
either.
One thing we do, and has been part of the nation's DNA for 150 years, is investigative reporting. And we're very proud that in 2016, a story we did on for-profit federal prisons, our coverage of abuses in those prisons led Sally Yates, who's become an interesting figure, then the Deputy Attorney General, to close those prisons down, crediting the nation at that time.
Yeah.
So I would simply say part of our work is, we're not in it for $1, we're in it to make a difference, though I'm happy to talk to anyone.
Well, we're going to talk about money in a minute, but I
about
think
dollars, but that
yeah.
the change making,
Yeah.
that mission-aligned journalism
Right.
is, I think, what attracts people of all ages.
I think Tom talked about this in his opening remarks. I mean, the authority, the environment of the context of the content that these folks produce, the audience engagement. There's a lot of garbage in, garbage out, as we like to say, out there on the net. So having brands that have all of the authority that you have, I think, is really the secret sauce that has kept you going and will keep you going for the next 100 years. Let's talk about money, because we're all in this business, most everyone is in this business, to drive revenue and drive profit. So Susan, talk about Nat Geo broke off of the society a few years ago, has now become a for-profit entity in the media group after many years, decades of being nonprofit. So you're in the money. Talk about where you're making them. Talk about where you're getting that money from.
Well, so yes, we were part of the nonprofit. Now we are a for-profit company, and we are part of the Fox Disney transaction. So soon to join, I think, the Disney company. Look, we're going to make money ultimately, I think, because of a membership model, that we will be able to offer, a suite of different products and services across our many platforms that people will want to participate in at different levels, whether it's events or going on our trips and having trip discounts, to reading the magazine in print, to having all of our digital experiences, our podcasts. All of those things are going to bundle up into a membership model that I think ultimately is going to be the future for us. And in fact, Nat Geo kind of invented the membership model way back when. And there's that scene in A Wonderful Life, the movie, where Jimmy Stewart is proudly proclaiming he's a member of the National Geographic Society. And so we need to really get back to that and double down on that.
Great. Joe, how are you going to make some money?
Well, we're lucky right now at Popular Science that we're making money off traditional means. Our circulation is strong, and we have incredibly high renewal rate. I'm sure a lot of people here are in the same boat. And our ad sales team is firing on all cylinders right now and taking advantage of what, if we're being frank, is sort of maybe the best chance we're going to get in the next while to capitalize on advertising as an income stream. If we are looking as business leaders in our companies at the trends, advertising is not going up, right? It is a contracting industry. We have to manage it like a declining business and be thinking forward to other business revenues that we're going to make, no matter how good things are right now. And so we're testing a number of options. Bonnier as a company has been a really wonderful champion to have because we have all of these other aspects of our business. We have an entire events business that operates independent of all the brands that can help support us in developing unique popular science events, and we have some irons in the fire. We also have an entire column of the company that's involved in licensing. And when you have these really old, stalwart brands like we have here, and I think everybody on this stage is better than I am at licensing their brands for amazing.
Pick the one thing that's really your the superstar outside of your traditional print and/or digital ad-based model. What's the one thing that's like on fire that is trending big time?
I'm really excited about our licensing progress because the name Popular Science is the most valuable thing we have.
Give a product. What's a product?
I can't talk about that yet. That's great. It's a great try.
Oh, it's coming.
Yes.
It's coming. It hasn't happened yet. Jane, how about revenue, profits?
I feel like I mirror a lot of that. I think that these iconic brands that have great power, have great engagement with audience, I think the idea of a model that is the most well-rounded is the most ideal. So I think that's sort of where we're focusing, that idea of sort of beyond the page, the experiential. And
talk about the Mall of America experience that you just had with the consumer.
Oh, well, we did sort of a beta version of a store where we presented only product that had been tested in the Institute. And that was a really exciting experience for us and really important now as media has become so fractured. Yeah. So this brand that 30, 40, 50 years ago, the Good Housekeeping seal and the Institute were known by one and all and understood fairly clearly by the consumer. The deliverable continues to be the same, but the marketplace is a lot more fractured. And so for us to be able to be in a real space for people to come in and actually see, and we filled the store with content as well as product, so information about each of these products and why they performed well and how they're going to work for you, et cetera. It was a really exciting
This pop-up, you had great traffic, great stats.
We did, yes, no, it was amazing.
And an Amazon partnership as well, which drove actual purchasing right there and a rev share, which was even more exciting. So, Katrina, what are you most excited about?
The nation is, of course, a media entity, but it's also a community. And in that spirit, first of all, circulation is our biggest driver. We've never been advertising driven, so we haven't been hit as hard. We are for profit, but we've had a donor operation since the 70s. And what I love is we have 18,000 small donors, which is so in sync with our politics, who give from $5 to $500 a year. Then we build that out, and some of those small donors come on our annual cruise, 22nd year. The New York Times once called it the left boat for policy wonks. My sister calls it the left love boat. But we've started trips, we run trips to Cuba, to Colombia, to India, to Russia. The Iran trip fell apart for geopolitical reasons. But the trip that has really taken off is a civil rights trip, which builds on our reporting. We have extraordinary contacts in the South and in other relevant places. So that's been a very important part of our work.
Do those small donors get a subscription when they donate, or is that a separate?
It's a separate. But many of those small donors are subscribers.
Right.
So we've built out this kind of diversification, and I'll say Danny Meyer has given us his private room at Maialino every month to do a series of discussions and debates. So
Fantastic.
it's a
Fantastic.
good diversification.
I'm going to interrupt, and for our last question, because we're running out of time, I think that, so you are all seasoned editors who have run, Susan ran major newspapers as editor-in-chief. You've run, iconic brands, 100-plus-year-old brands. Give a word of wisdom in our final round. A word of wisdom, we'll start with Katrina first and go right across. Give a word of wisdom to the audience in terms of what you've learned, what you know, what you've discovered about really, and what's important about keeping a 100-plus-year-old brand relevant, dynamic, exciting to your users and readers.
To be principled, to be passionate, to respect a younger generation, and to speak truth to power, and to do the kind of journalism that never goes out of fashion.
Perfect. Love it. Jane?
I think for us at Good Housekeeping, we look at our audiences today and think, what's the most important part of their life, and how do we be part of that in the same way that we did at the turn of the century, in the 50s, et cetera. So really, what are women in their homes needing the most from us on a day-to-day basis?
Okay. Joe?
I would say really engage with your angriest reader because they tend to be the ones who love you the most.
Love that.
Ooh,
Love
that's
that.
good.
Susan, wrap us up.
On the side of science, on the side of the facts, on the side of the planet, taking people places that they couldn't go to otherwise.
Love that. How about a round of applause for our esteemed panel? Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Let's go this way. Come on down.
It's great to meet you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a short break. Please return promptly at 10:45 a.m.